Have you ever been stuck in a rut? There are many ruts in life. If you've done no exercise for many years, you'll probably find that you're in a fitness rut that resists change. There are other ruts in life as well. Getting started on a new project perhaps can be difficult when you're in a rut of procrastination. Some ruts are good, I suppose. Habitual behaviour is a great thing, and if it's the right habit that captivates you. But more often than not, when we say we're stuck in a rut, it's a negative thing. It means we're having difficulty escaping a wrong behaviour or no behaviour. Someone has said a rut is nothing but a grave with the ends kicked out. Somebody else said many have the right aim in life, they just never getting around to pulling the trigger. That also means you're stuck in a rut. Probably all of us get the wheels of our lives stuck in ruts from time to time. So in this sermon I want us to look at a story in the Bible of a man who was in about the deepest rut anyone could ever experience. Most people of his day considered his rut to be inescapable. His name was Bartimaeus, and he was a blind beggar who lived in the ancient city of Jericho. We'll pick up on Mark's account in his Gospel, chapter 10, reading from verse 49. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to keep quiet. But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man. "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Now let me take a moment to sketch out for you the kind of rut poor old Bart found himself in. First, he was blind. In his day, a blind man couldn't work. He couldn't read, he couldn't write. 15-year-old Louis Braille would not invent his revolutionary communication method for the blind for another 1800 years. Bart couldn't even get around. There were no seeing eye dogs in that day because dogs were unclean animals to the Jews, and they were not used as companions for the blind until 1916. So poor old Bartimaeus was reduced to begging. A man in his condition, unless he had relatives to support him, could do little else but sit near a popular thoroughfare and cry out, "Alms, alms for the poor." He was also an object of pity most days. I say that because that was the key to him making a living. He needed people to pity him. It was only by soliciting the sympathy of others that he could survive. And he probably got pretty good at what he did. He had a lot of practice. Finally, for the most part, his life was reduced to those last 4 words of verse 46, sitting by the road. That was his rut. Blind, begging, pitied, sitting by the road. For most people, such obstacles would be considered inescapable. But Bartimaeus got out of his rut. The purpose of this sermon is to show you how he did it and how you too can get out of any rut you find yourself in as well. There are several things Bartimaeus did that day when Jesus passed by his begging station that helped him get out of that rut. Yes, I know it could be said that it was Jesus who did that. Something that Bartimaeus could not do for himself. Nevertheless, had Bartimaeus not done these things and gotten out of his very deep rut, he would never have been healed. The actions Bartimaeus took that day suggest several things that you and I can do when we find ourselves and our lives so confined that it could be said we're in a rut. As I progress through this sermon, I will phrase each principle as though I were pointing the biblical principle right at you personally. And I hope you will take it that way, realising, of course, that it applies to all of us. The first and most important principle is this: assume responsibility for your own life. Verse 47 says, when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Notice here that Bartimaeus took the initiative himself to cry out. That is very important. Perhaps the most important observation of the 7 initiatives that took place that day. Do you remember the days of your childhood when, if you were uncomfortable or afraid or hurting, you could always count on mum or dad or maybe some relative to take care of you? You don't have to be afraid, you were reassured, I'll take care of you. Then for most of you, you left your home, an action that was perhaps at first a little scary. Could you make it on your own? Who would you turn to? Would you have to run back to mum or dad in humiliation? You probably did a lot of growing up in those first couple of years on your own. Perhaps the best definition there is to describe someone who has truly grown up is one who has assumed responsibility for his or her own life. Now, one reason a rut is so hard to break out of is it's secure, it's comfortable, it's safe, it's predictable. Like those easy days when you could count on mum and dad. Oh, we make all kinds of excuses, but really there is very little risk in doing the same thing that has always carried you through in the past. From the bottom of our ruts we ask, why should I give up what is comfortable in exchange for what is untried? Someone as handicapped as Bartimaeus could certainly be subject to that kind of reasoning. He probably wouldn't have to look too far to find those who would support him in his thinking. No, he didn't particularly enjoy sitting there beside the road, but at least it was comfortable. At least he knew what the day would bring. It was what he was used to. It's what he did very well. Being dependent upon others wasn't the most rewarding lifestyle, but at least he knew what he'd be doing tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. Yet, deep down, Bartimaeus dreamed of more. He dreamed of being able to see. That day when Jesus passed by, Bartimaeus was suddenly faced with the biggest decision of his life. Would he continue to be dependent upon others, where he felt safe and predictable, or would he assume responsibility for himself and risk climbing out of his rut? For every Bartimaeus in this world who risks getting out of a rut, there are probably 1,000 who shrink back, unwilling to take that risk. Think for a moment about whatever rut you may be in. Yes, you can continue to blame your parents or the society or your nationality or your rotten luck in life or your lack of self-discipline or the fat genes you inherited from your parents or the weather or the government or whatever. Even God you can blame. You have the freedom to do that. But there's a price to pay for that dubious freedom. You'll be a rut dweller the rest of your life. You might as well quit dreaming. Don't bother hoping. Quit thinking about the day when your ship will come in or someone will reach down and pull you out. Unless you take responsibility for your own life and your own situation, nothing will change. Then comes the next really important thing that anyone stuck in a rut needs to do. Believe you can change. For Bartimaeus, it took some real faith that day to cast aside his cloak, jump up and move in the direction of the sound of the crowd surrounding Jesus. That faith comes from a deep belief that things can change. Verse 52 says, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." Where does that belief and faith come from anyway? Are we talking about a kind of hopeful leap in the dark when we talk of believing that you can change? I don't think so. Faith must be based upon some evidence. Otherwise, it's nothing more than being gullible. Notice that phrase in verse 47. And when he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene, he began to cry out. That implies some recognition and knowledge. Bartimaeus had probably heard about Jesus, heard that he was healing people. There were descriptions of at least 6 people who were healed of blindness in the New Testament. There may have been many more. Bart would have heard of at least some of those. How does that apply to you and me? Well, the Bible says in Romans 10 verse 17, faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. Hearing such stories produces faith, and that's one of the great blessings of the Bible. It's full of stories of people who, with God's help, overcame tremendous odds and escaped deep ruts. Besides that, there are many reassuring principles to cheer us on. Not only that, there are also contemporary stories that can be told as well. That's one reason we gather to look into God's Word and encourage one another and share our testimonies each Sunday. You don't get that outside these walls very often. Out there, most people don't believe you can change. They're busy perfecting the art of blaming others and explaining why change is impossible. They've made so many excuses for themselves for so long, and for others, that anything beyond mediocrity now sounds impossible. There is sufficient evidence both in the Bible and in experience to assure you that you can break out of your rut. Many people have. But you must avail yourself to that reality by believing that you can change. Thirdly, you need to clarify what you really need. Notice in verse 51 what Jesus asked Bartimaeus. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus already knew, but it was important for Bartimaeus to clearly say what his need was. That's why Jesus asked. He could have just read the man's mind. He could have just noticed that he was blind and thought it was obvious. The question wasn't asked for Jesus' benefit. It was asked for Bartimaeus' benefit and those who were watching on. Seldom do any of us do anything about the ruts we live in until our circumstances force us to. Even then, we seldom move until we get to the place where we set a goal and make a decision. I suspect that some of you have given up setting any goals in your life. You've said something to the effect, I've failed to hit my targets before, so I'm just going to quit making any commitments. It's a waste of time. That way it won't be obvious if I fail. But a life with no goals is a life of a rut dweller. If you have no goals, no aspirations, if you quit dreaming, if you forget hope and your chance of hitting something you don't aim at is virtually nil. Certainly, if you hope to break out of a rut, you have to be willing to clarify what it is you really need and want. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. Bartimaeus didn't hesitate. It was clear. Rabbi, I want to see. The fourth thing, stop worrying about what other people will say. Sometimes that is what keeps many of us trapped in our ruts. It's the fear of ridicule or disapproval from others. Think of a guy who wants to get started on an exercise program. He figures his best bet is to get into a local exercise gym and he buys up a 1-year membership. He calls, he signs up, he has his interview, he pays the money. But then he never goes. Why? Well, let me tell you what often happens. Too often. And when you've heard this, you'll understand why they ask for 12 months. Those businesses are smart. He probably went down and brought the flashy singlet and the shorts and with the stripe on the side, you know, the ones, and he probably got a new set of shoes that they recommended, paying more for them than he'd ever paid for shoes in his life. Then the big day came. He got in the car, he got his towel, he drove to the gym. If he was brave, he actually got out and went inside. And as he walked through the door and looked around, what did he see? He saw 10 or 20 trim, hardened bodies, 20 years his junior, working out, looking terrific. That's what he saw. Then as he looked down at his middle-aged belly hanging over his pants and considered what he would look like and what might be said under the breaths of every person in the gym that looking at him right at that moment, he turned around, walked out and never came back, even if it meant losing a whole year's subscription. It's a very common story. It keeps gyms in business, and it's told every year across the country. Bartimaeus didn't have to imagine what others would say if he stepped towards this solution that day. They already told him. Verse 48 says, and many were sternly telling him to be quiet, but he kept crying out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. You see, he had to push past what other people thought and said. What you and I have to realise is that the vast majority of people making up the human race are critics. They're pessimists. Not only that, they're also fickle. You see, since most people who attempt to climb out of a rut end up climbing back in, people around get to believing that is the norm. That's what's expected. Most of them aren't willing to risk encouraging somebody who won't be daunted by those odds. They might get laughed at for making rash predictions, so they take the safe route. They conclude you won't make it. They opt for what they figure will be the winning side, and so they end up discouraging you. That's why the Bible warns us about the company we keep. If we hang around and listen to fearful or negative people, we will become fearful or negative. I find it interesting that in certain key battles in the Old Testament, God sent those who were fearful home, even though it lessened the number of troops. Now, I also said they were fickle, and that is best illustrated in our text in verse 48, as we have already seen. Says, many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. You can almost hear them now, can't you? Shut up, Bartimaeus. The rabbi isn't interested in people like you. Besides, what could he do for you? People like you are better off quiet. But Bartimaeus didn't listen. Then look what happened. Verse 49 says, Jesus stopped and said, call him. And so they called the blind man, saying to him, cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you. Talk about fickle. In one breath they're saying, shut up, Bartimaeus. Then when Jesus said what he said, when he was willing to respond, they quickly jumped on the other side of the fence and said, come on, Bartimaeus, what are you doing? Do you see why you must stop worrying about what other people think or say? What they say is often totally irrelevant to you. They're only saying what they figure is the safest thing to say for them. If you make it out of your rut, they'll say, oh, we knew all along you could do it. And if you don't, they'll say the same thing. We knew all along you couldn't. Now, I'm not saying we should never get good counsel from godly people, but if you listen to the crowd, you'll stay in your rut. That's guaranteed. Stop worrying about what other people say. Number 5 is stop waiting for ideal circumstances. This is a big one. The situation on the day Bartimaeus was healed was far from ideal. Verse 46 says that Jesus was going out from Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude. What chance did anyone have of getting Jesus' attention when he was on his way somewhere else? Hardly any. So what chance did a blind man have? Even less. Perhaps Bartimaeus should have waited for a better time. Maybe tomorrow, or the next day, or the next week, or the next year, when Jesus is back in town. When he's coming into town, not leaving. Maybe he'd be brave on his birthday or on New Year's Day. That's all classic rut dweller language and thinking. Waiting for ideal circumstances will leave you in the rut. A rut that could ultimately become a grave. So stop waiting for ideal circumstances. Number 6, do something bold and dramatic. We're talking about risk here, aren't we? It's a bit scary. Probably some of you have already dismissed all of this and decided to keep to the security of your rut. That's certainly your choice. But at least be honest about it. Don't blame others. Bartimaeus put it all out in front for everyone to see. In verse 50 he says, throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. He was completely invested. What a big, bold, open, public stand to take. He was determined to get out of his rut. A young man once sought out an older, successful executive for some advice. He found him at his beachfront home. After introducing himself, he asked if the older man would counsel him on the ins and outs of being successful in business. At that request, the older man asked the younger one to accompany him down to the beach. As they were walking along, suddenly the older man grabbed the younger, dragged him out into the surf. In one swift movement, he thrust the man's head under the water and he held him down. In panic, the younger man fought the older man's grasp. Finally, when he was about to black out, the older man loosened his grip and let him up. After regaining his breath, the younger man asked what on earth was going on. He never forgot the man's reply. This is what he said. When you want success as badly as you wanted that air, you will most probably get it. That's really the issue, isn't it? Too often we think we want to get out of our rut when really we don't. At least we don't want it badly enough to do whatever it takes to be free from whatever entraps us. Are you willing to do something bold if that's required? Are you willing to take a stand in front of others? I don't think something that is drastic is necessary. You might say, I don't want to go overboard. Well, maybe not. But have your less drastic choices made any difference? How is that working for you? Maybe it's time to get a bit bold. Do something dramatic. Now finally, if you want to break out of that rut, you need to make your move now. Perhaps nothing keeps people in ruts longer than procrastination. Bartimaeus had no idea Jesus was coming to his town that day. The day was just like every other day to him as he climbed off his sleeping pallet and felt his way down to his familiar spot beside the road. He didn't have time to prepare. It was suddenly just there. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't take time to plan, but do something now or the occasion will pass by and become just like all of the others where you didn't break out of your rut. So make your move now. I hope you'll consider using these 7 principles when you find yourself in a rut. Let me say one more thing before I finished. Perhaps the most dangerous rut a person can be in is one that leads them away from God. With that in mind, I want to close with this haunting poem by Theodore Brennan. It's called Those Wasted Years. I looked upon a farm one day that once I used to own. The barn had fallen to the ground, the fields were overgrown. The house in which my children grew, where we had lived for years, I turned to see it broken down and brushed aside the tears. I looked upon my soul one day to find it too had grown with thorns and nettles everywhere, the seeds neglect had sown. The years had passed while I had cared for things of lesser worth. The things of heaven I let go when minding things of earth. To Christ I turned with bitter tears and cried, O Lord, forgive. I haven't much time left for you, not many years to live. The wasted years forever gone, the days I can't recall. If I could live those days again, I'd make him Lord of all. Friends, the Bible says today is the day of salvation. If you are stuck in a rut that's leading you away from God, today is the day to get out. Do it now. If you don't, you will never seize the day.